Next up, we have Lorekeeper Polkelt, which is maybe the most interesting card in the set, and potentially one of the more powerful cards in the set as well. It's a 4-mana 4/5 neutral legendary. Battlecry, reorder your deck from the highest cost card to the lowest cost card. So basically, the turn after you play this, or the next card you draw after you play this, is going to be your most expensive card, and then after that is your second most expensive card, and you get to bury all your 1-drops and stuff that you don't want to be drawing at this point in the game anyway. So this is actually a really open-ended card. There's a lot you can do with this. Probably the most, level 1 thing you can do with this is just, play it in an aggro or mid-range deck, and then you don't have to worry about drawing your cheap stuff. You just draw your curve-out stuff and start murdering your opponent. Probably the best application of this would be in Highlander Hunter. So you play this on turn 6 or whatever, and then your next turn you can guarantee that you draw a Dino Tamer Brand on turn 7. You don't play Dragon Queen Alexstrasza or into Grand Slam in that deck, but that's probably fine. So yeah, if you can guarantee that you draw Dino Tamer Brand on turn 7, that is pretty insane. Or, maybe you draw Siamat instead if you get unlucky, and I think you're kind of okay if you Siamat on 7 and Dino Tamer Brand on turn 8 instead. So I think Highlander Hunter, at the very least, is interested in playing this card, and it might just be sick in Highlander Hunter because Bran is so broken. But there's some more degenerate stuff you can do with this card too. You can play it in Quest Warlock, and you can basically guarantee what your hero power is hitting and discounting to 0. So you can guarantee a 0-mana Malagos or 0-mana Alexstrasza. That's pretty ridiculous, of course. I think maybe one of the most practical and still extremely degenerate things you can do with this is in Galakrond Rogue. So you invoke your Galakrond, and then you put your Galakrond on top of your deck. And then when you play Galakrond, it draws and discounts Kronk's, Ice Baron Togwaggle, Flick, and Shield of Galakrond. That's just absolutely insane. I wonder if that's why Galakrond got nerfed. I mean, Galakrond probably deserved the nerf either way, but man, this card is insane with Galakrond and Rogue. And honestly, it's probably pretty good with the other Galakronds as well. I'm not actually sure how it interacts with the Warrior Galakrond, because the Warrior Galakrond also draws, but it draws specifically minions. So does it just take the top minions, or is it some weird shuffle thing with your deck? I don't know, but maybe it could be pretty sick with the Warrior Galakrond as well, if you have some specific stuff you want to buff. Or even if you don't have specific stuff you want to buff and you just want to have basically a second tutor for your Galakrond. A tutor that doesn't involve wasting your Kronks and then guarantees that you probably get to play Kronks the turn after Galakrond anyway. So yeah, Lorekeeper, insane with Galakronds. And actually in Galakrond Warrior, if it does work, you draw your most expensive stuff, you could probably reasonably build it so that you always draw Scion of Rune off of it, which is insane. But yeah, that's pretty insane. I'm sure there's other insane stuff you can do with this card, but just off those examples, that's what, 4 decks that I'm already really interested in playing this in, and I legitimately think it could be one of the best cards in any of those decks. So yeah, I think this card's very strong. At least sees a ton of experimentation, and I think will probably legitimately end up in a lot of decks. Next we have Secret Passage, a rogue spell. 1 mana, replace your hand with 5 cards from your deck, swap back next turn. So this card seems nuts to me. I want to compare it to Myra's Unstable Element, which was a 5-mana card that drew you into a bunch of burn or whatever to end the game in your aggro deck. And I think the effect of Secret Passage is very comparable to this. It's basically just a reload for your aggro rogue deck, except it costs 4 less mana than Myra's Unstable Element. And Myra's Unstable was so good that you, as an aggro deck, you kept the most expensive card in your deck in some matchups, just because the reload from it is so insane. And I think the reload from Secret Passage is comparable to that. It costs 4 less mana, and you can play 2 copies of it, so that is really insane. Now, it is a bit of an issue of how much burn you can fit in your deck, because that tends to be what's good with this. You draw into burn, and, you know, kill your opponent with it. When Myra's Unstable Element was in Standard, so was Leroy. So we don't get that, but we still get Waggle Pick. We get Hooked Scimitar, maybe. SI7 Agent is reasonable. We can still play Eviscerates, of course. Cold Blood even, maybe. Probably not Cold Blood, but, you know, maybe Cold Blood. Or you can even just get some minions to play. Draw into a Spy Mistress, nice. One thing that wasn't immediately obvious to me when I saw this, that does make it seem a little bit less good, is that you kinda can't really draw cards the turn you play this. So initially I wanted to just play this in Galakron Rogue, and if I don't have Galakron on like turn 8 or whatever, I just Secret Passage, try to find my Galakron, and put it in play. But I believe the way this works, any cards you draw this turn are also just going to get thrown back into your deck when you swap back next turn. So card draw with this is not very strong. And because of that, I'm not entirely convinced that this will be good in Galakron Rogue. Although in Desperate Times it is still a card you can use to fish for Kronks. Or if you're on turn 10, it is still pretty good to fish for Galakron with it. So definitely not an unreasonable card in Galakron Rogue. But I think for this to be truly degenerate and truly overpowered, we're looking at an aggressive rogue deck. And we've actually seen a few other cards, notably the warrior/rogue cards, that seem like they might be supporting aggro rogue. So yeah, I think this actually could see a lot of play in a deck like that. And maybe just see play in every rogue deck. Kinda remains to be seen how good this effect is. Next we have Sphere of Sapience, which is a neutral legendary weapon. 1 mana, 0/4. At the start of your turn, look at your top card. You can put it on the bottom and lose 1 durability. So it's important to note that this only loses durability, I believe, the way I'm reading it. It only loses durability if you put the card on the bottom of your deck. So it's not like this card is just in play for 4 turns. It's in play until you actually use its effect 4 times. So it can be in play for 10 turns or whatever. And of course, having influence over your draws is pretty good. Say you play this on turn 1, on turn 2 you draw, like say you're playing this in Highlander Mage or something. Turn 2 you draw into, you know, Power of Creation. Nope, throw that to the bottom of my deck. Turn 3 you draw Imprisoned Observer. Nice, I'll keep that one. And then turn 4 you draw maybe like Ruststeed Raider, and you're like, okay, that's fine for turn 5, so I'll just keep that. And then on turn 5 you have some more flexibility. Maybe at that point you do keep Power of the Creation because turn 8's coming up or whatever. It just gives you a lot of control over your draws. And if you play this, going with the Highlander Mage example, if you're up against like aggro or something, maybe you do hit like Malagos on turn 5, but it's just not good enough. You need to try to dig for Rolling Fireball or Bone Wraith or something. Then you can do that as well. So this is definitely a powerful effect. The downside, of course, is that it costs a card. It doesn't cost much mana, which is nice. So you can just kind of throw it out, but it does cost a card. And costing a card is a pretty significant downside. I mean, that's the reason that not every quest plays, or every deck plays quests, right? Because, like, even starting with this in your opening hand, sometimes it's just not worth it to be down a card to play Raid the Sky Temple or whatever. But I do think this card has a significant enough effect that you're willing to be down a card. Another downside, though, is that this effect is extremely slow. I said earlier, you know, it only loses durability when you actually use the effect. It can be in play for like 10 turns or whatever. But that also means that it might take 10 turns to really get full value out of this. So I think your deck needs to be reasonably slow to really consider playing this card. Like, the effect is powerful. I would love to have this effect in Demon Hunter. But obviously if I'm playing Demon Hunter, I'm kind of just hoping that my opponent's dead on like turn 6 or 7. Maybe if I could always guarantee that I have this on turn 1, that'd be pretty sick. But even then, I think I'd much rather be playing a Battle Fiend or a Battle Mage. So yeah, I think we're mostly limiting this to like control decks, combo decks, and maybe slow mid-range decks. Like would Highlander Hunter want to play this? This deck's pretty mid-range. But even Highlander Hunter, especially with the Lorekeeper guy, I think they're trying to kill people in turn 7 pretty often. So probably too slow for a deck like that. I do think that in the decks it's good in, it is very good though. But even though it's a neutral weapon, it is pretty limited to the classes you can play it in. I mentioned Demon Hunter earlier just kind of in passing because it's an aggro deck, but it's actually a pretty terrible card specifically in Demon Hunter because for one, you play other weapons which conflict with this, but also like your Demon Hunter hero power, you can't really use reasonably while this is in play because you burn weapon charges for no real advantage. So for that reason, you're not really looking to play this in Demon Hunter. Druid, it's kind of sketchy with Druid hero power, but you can probably get away with it. In Rogue, I don't think you're too excited to be playing this, but I guess if you're playing Control Rogue, maybe you don't care that much about your weapon. And then you have like Warrior, which this kind of effect would be good in Warrior, and you can actually cheat it out with Corsair Cash and Warrior, which is a cute synergy. But Warrior often has other weapons that are pretty important, Ankars, Wrench Calibers, and I don't think you give those up for Sphere, and you can't really play both because like I said, the Sphere is so slow. So it is a little bit limited to the classes you can actually play it in. But like Mage, Priest, maybe Paladin are all fairly interested in a card like this, I think. And I think this card will be reasonably powerful and we'll see some play. But I don't think it's the news that Leax or whatever. Next we have another neutral legendary, Vectus. 5 mana 4/4, Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 whelps. Each gains a death rattle from your minions that died this game. So it's important to note that apparently you need 2 death rattles for each of your whelps to get one. So I was originally thinking, heck, maybe you just play this in aggro decks with Serpent Egg, and then once you've killed a Serpent Egg, you play 5 mana 4/4 with 2 1/1s that drop 3/4s. That's pretty insane. But if you've only had one Serpent Egg die, apparently only one of the whelps gets the death rattle, which is kind of weird. And I actually think that makes the card a lot less strong. Just looking at the pool of death rattle minions, I think it's actually pretty difficult to have even one death rattle minion that's died by turn 5 consistently. And having 2 death rattle minions that have already died on turn 5, I think is actually very difficult to do. So I think it's going to be hard to play this on curve and get value out of it. It is still a 5 mana 4/4 that makes 2 1/1s, but you can compare that to like Silverhand Knight, is that what the 5-drop is called? The 4/4 that summons a 2/2. And that card has been really far from playable, so you really do need to be getting the death rattle value out of this. And yeah, just looking through the death rattles again, I think maybe Hunter is like one of the more reasonable decks that could play it. You can play like Hellbore, you can play Shimmerfly, that's a lot of death rattles. But this deck is probably playing Augmented Porcupine, which is not very good with Vectus. So that's a little bit sketchy. You can also use it to get more copies of Prime minions, which is a lot of value, but it's really slow, and it doesn't change the fact that your Vectus is just kind of a really shitty 6/6 on turn 5, which is not very good. But if you're playing a super slow deck that can get like extra Solarian Primes, that is strong. But you do have to have more death rattles than just the Prime, and I think it's kind of hard to do that in a lot of slow control decks that would care about copying Prime minions, and that's if there are even any slow control decks that care about copying Prime minions. Maybe Rogue could do something really janky with this. It has a reasonably good Prime minion, and it also has Waxadread. Waxadread, and the little whelp shuffle more Waxadreads in, and actually just one Waxadread as your only death rattle in your entire deck could be your only activator, and then you would still have enough death rattles for both the whelps. So maybe that could be cute, but Waxadread's a pretty bad card. You can't really even play this in Zoo. Like I mentioned Serpent Egg earlier, but in Zoo, if you're playing like Expired Merchant, I assume that just gets in the way of your Vectus, which is kind of shitty. You can play some like neutral card draw, Loot Hoarders, and Thalnos. But I'm not sure that this card is even that good if it hits double Loot Hoarder. Like 5 mana 4/4, draw 2. Like, it's better than Big Ol' Whelp, but it's pretty situational for how marginally better it is than Big Ol' Whelp. Maybe you can somehow play this in like Ramp Druid or something and copy Scrapyard Colossus, but then it's interfering with strength and numbers. I don't know. I think this card's pretty sketchy. I think if we had a better pool of Death Rattles, this could potentially be like a meta-defining, game-breaking card. But with the current pool of Death Rattles, it really just doesn't seem very strong to me. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm not trying to copy Acorn Bearers or whatever. Next we have a Mage/Shaman legendary, Ras Frostwhisper. 5 mana 3/6, at the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies, improved by spell damage. So, I think people are getting really baited by the improved by spell damage text on this card. All you really need to know about this is that it's Despicable Dreadlord with 1 extra health that also goes face. And Despicable Dreadlord is a very good card. It's all play in aggro and control. So I have to imagine that Ras is going to see some amount of play. But of course, compared to Despicable Dreadlord, even just being a playable card that also goes face and has a bigger butt, this also is improved by spell damage, which is relevant. It's relevant specifically for Shaman and Mage in particular. So Mage, even Highlander Mage, like already plays Astromancer Solarian. That's a pretty good spell damage card. Azure Explorer is a reasonable card that you could play. If this thing is doing like 3 damage, that's just very insane. Squall Hunter, another thing that could make this deal 3 damage, pretty nice. You could actually go turn 4 Squall Hunter into turn 5 Lightning Bloom plus Ras. Very, very strong. Lady Vosh as well as a playable spell damage minion. Shaman, of course, has spell damage totem, which is powerful. Blood Mage Thalnos is a good card. Maybe Ethereal Log Merchant is fine. And there are actually... there's a... Mage is getting a new 1-drop that has spell damage. There's also Mozaki Master Duelist. That's a good meme, right? You Mozaki and cast like 10 spells. And then you play Ras Frostwhisper. And it deals 11 damage to your opponent's board every turn. That's pretty sick. But really, that's just all upside. This card is good enough as Despicable Dreadlord, and then you can also do spell damage stuff. So, I think Highlander Mage easily plays this card. Any Control Shaman that exists plays this card. Totem Shaman might play this card. It's just a good card. Also, a cute interaction is that in Mage, you play Imprisoned Observer on turn 3, and your opponent's like, ha, I'll just play 3 health minions. And then it wakes up on turn 5, says everything to 1, and you play Ras, and they're very sad. Yeah, good card. Next we have Groundskeeper, a Druid/Shaman card. 4 mana 4/5 with Taunt, Battlecry. If you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, restore 5 health. So this is Sinjin with +1 attack, and it can heal. That is, that's pretty powerful. We've seen that Druid, Quest Druid in particular, has been able to play Steel Beetle, has a very similar effect to this card. But I think the Groundskeeper is probably more efficiently statted, plus has Taunt. So I think Quest Druid, if that happens to exist, would be very interested in this card. But other druids could play it as well. There are plenty of activators. Aeroponics is, you know, a fine activator in your Treant druid that totally exists. Glowfly Swarm is a weird card, a weird activator, because it does activate this. But if you're playing Glowfly Swarm, you probably want to play Fungal Fortunes. And I'm not sure that Groundskeeper is good enough to go in a Fungal Fortunes deck. And Fungal Fortunes decks might just dominate the druid class. So for that reason, Groundskeeper might not see play. But I think in most other Druid decks, you're pretty interested in this. Although I guess whatever Druid deck has to actually be able to enable this card, so like Embiggen Druid probably can't really play this either, if that's even a real deck. But yeah, Nourish, Overflow, Hidden Oasis maybe, Forest Shade. Pretty reasonable activators for it in Druid. And as I said with Steel Beetle, we know this sort of effect is playable in Druid. In Shaman, I think this card, the effect is certainly good in Shaman as well, but I think your activators are a little bit more limited. If you're playing a Control Shaman, you're probably playing Scheme and Earthquake. I guess in Galakron Shaman you play Dragon's Pack as well, so maybe like Galakron Shaman, if it plays 2 packs, 2 schemes, maybe that's just good enough. If you're playing a Fist of Ra Din deck, you could play Eye of the Storm. So there are definitely a reasonable amount of activators. I do feel like Druid and Shaman are both kind of like on the borderline of having enough activators. But this card is powerful enough that you might want to force it. It's, it's a 5 health taunt that heals for 5. So it's like a 10 health swing against aggro that also is going to kill probably like 2 or 3 other things. And it actually manages to come down at a pretty relevant point in the curve, which is not always the case for healing in these classes. Like, Walking Fountain's a great healing card, but yikes, turn 8. Druid has Hidden Oasis. This does come out 2 turns before Druid, or before Hidden Oasis and Druid. So yeah, it's a very well-statted minion. It's got taunt, and it heals. It does both of those things very well. So it seems pretty playable if it can be activated.